I'm going to go ahead and start recording and say welcome again to the Pinniped Monitor training. Glad to have everyone with us today. I'm Justin Lindenberg, the Executive Director of Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods, and excited to introduce Jessica, Andy, and Hollis. Do you guys want to say hi and share what your role is here?
Well, I can start. I'm Hollis, and I've been a volunteer with Stewards since 2008 when I joined with the Tide Pool Education Program. And I have been coordinating that program ever since. And then when the Seabird Monitoring Program started up in 2013, I started coordinating that. And then recently started doing the scheduling and the coordination for the Pinniped Monitoring Program. So another community science program that I'm involved in that is connected with Stewards is the Farallones Marine Sanctuary Beach Watch program, which is a lot of fun too. So I'm glad to see so many of you joining us today.
Hollis also has an important leadership role as Stewards Board Chair.
Retirement is not as quiet as it's made out to be.
On the new vocation.
I'll go next. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Jessica Martini-Lamb, I'm an Environmental Resources Manager and Wildlife Biologist at Sonoma Water. I've been working on the Russian River Estuary since I started at Sonoma Water back in 1998. One of my first field activities as a biologist with Sonoma Water was doing harbor seal monitoring with Dr. Joe Mortensen out at the estuary. So I've been lucky enough to work in the estuary for a really long time. And I think I will turn it over to Andrea.
Thanks, Jessica and Justin and everyone for participating today. It's great to see so many people. My name's Andrea Petrich, and I've been with Sonoma Water for over 10 years now. The Pinniped monitoring is one of my roles at Sonoma Water, but my background is definitely heavy into marine mammals and pinnipeds. I started with some elephant seal monitoring at Año Nuevo and did harbor seal monitoring in and around Humboldt Bay, Northern California. Then I've also spent years doing monitoring of California sea lion and northern fur seal populations on San Miguel Island. So I've had the opportunity to see a lot of different species in their natural habitat. And I think that's a great way to learn and to get excited about learning more. So I'm excited for you all who are part of the program and are thinking about joining us to have that opportunity here in your own backyard.
Thanks, everyone. We do have a specific vision, mission, and purpose, which I just want to share with folks as it kind of outlines the purpose of the program. So the vision for Pinniped monitoring is all species of concern, including but not limited to marine mammals, threatened and endangered salmonids, bird life, and other aquatic species will thrive together in the Russian River estuary. The mission is to collect and provide data that will be used by the National Marine Fisheries Service to ensure that pinnipeds are safeguarded under the Marine Mammal Protection Act at the mouth of the Russian River. And our purpose is that by monitoring pinnipeds, we aim to determine whether or not the modification of the Russian River estuary will impact the Jenner colony, which we will learn a lot more about from Jessica and Andy. So I will pass it off to you guys for your presentations, and looking forward to learning with everyone.
Great, thanks, Justin. So I will share my screen and get us started. And hopefully that worked and you see a title slide. Yes, thumbs up, thank you. So I'm going to give a little background about the Russian River Estuary Management Project that Sonoma Water is engaged in, has been for quite a while, and then a little bit of background about the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And there we go. Okay. So the Russian River Estuary is basically where the river meets the sea. So when the river mouth is open, the estuary is subject to tidal exchange and tidal influence from the mouth of the river at Goat Rock State Beach, all the way upstream to near the confluence of Austin Creek, near Duncan's Mills, and that's about 11 river kilometers. But as many of you know, the river mouth can close kind of any time of year. And it closes primarily due to ocean swells, ocean waves that are powerful enough to carry sediment offshore and deposit it into the river mouth and create what we refer to as a barrier beach. And when the barrier beach forms and closes the river mouth, water levels will start to back up and rise behind that barrier beach and create what's called a lagoon. And that lagoon condition can result in flooding of low-lying properties and structures along the estuary, and actually forms a backwater that can extend all the way back to Vacation Beach, all the way upstream to Vacation Beach. And so historically, when the barrier beach would form, in order to mitigate that potential for flood risk, people would go out and artificially breach the barrier beach. And that's been happening for many, many decades. It was either first done by private citizens, and then it was done by Sonoma County Public Works. In the mid-1990s, that responsibility to address flood risk came to Sonoma Water in county reorganization. And soon after that, the 3 salmon species in the Russian River watershed were listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So that's steelhead, coho salmon, and Chinook salmon. And I should mention that coho salmon are also state listed as endangered under the California Endangered Species Act. And so soon after those listings, Sonoma Water and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers engaged in consultation under the Federal Endangered Species Act, which resulted in what's called a biological opinion being issued by the National Marine Fisheries Service. And the biological opinion evaluated both the Army Corps of Engineers and Sonoma Water's operations in the watershed, including artificial breaching and estuary management and their potential to impact these listed salmon species. And the biological opinion determined that during the salmon rearing season, which in the estuary is from mid-May to mid-October, artificially breaching could impact or negatively impact rearing habitat for salmon. And so the biological opinion sort of dictates that we modify our activities in that mid-May through mid-October season in order to still address flood risks, but minimize the number of artificial breaching and try to keep higher water levels that provide additional rearing habitat for steelhead in the estuary. And that was primarily through implementation of an outlet channel after a river mouth closure and prolonging the time frame before artificial breaching occurs. So along with our actual beach management activities, Sonoma Water conducts quite a bit of biological and physical monitoring in the estuary. It includes monitoring for fisheries, so monitoring the movements and timing of juvenile salmon into the estuary in the summer months, as well as where they occur within the estuary. We've done pretty extensive invertebrate sampling within the estuary over the last 10 years since the biological, or 10 plus years since the biological opinion was issued, looking at both the composition and distribution of invertebrates within the estuary, and then looking at pretty closely at what juvenile steelhead are actually preying upon in the estuary. And then we also, of course, do pinniped monitoring as well as water quality monitoring, and quite a bit of study looking at the physical processes that affect both river mouth closures and how the waters within the estuary circulate. So in order to conduct any of our management activities and our monitoring activities, we have a whole suite of environmental regulations that we comply with. including the Federal Marine Mammal Protection Act. And the act prohibits taking marine mammals unless it's exempted or otherwise authorized under a permit. And the act authorizes what's called incidental taking that occurs under otherwise lawful activities. And the act actually has definitions for both take and harassment. So take is defined as to harass, hunt, capture, or kill, or attempt to do any of those things to any marine mammal. And then harassment is actually defined at 2 levels. And harassment is defined as any act of pursuit, torment, or annoyance, which has the potential to either injure a marine mammal, which is the level A harassment, or disturb their behavior, which is considered a level B harassment under the act. And then the Marine Mammal Protection Act authorizes National Marine Fisheries Service to issue permits. And these permits describe the permissible methods of take as defined under the act. And then they require mitigation measures to ensure that there's the least practical adverse impact on species and their habitat. And they also usually include requirements for both monitoring and reporting. So Sonoma Water receives what's called a letter of authorization permit under the Marine Mammal Protection Act for all of our management and monitoring activities. And we just recently, just yesterday, received our new letter of authorization. And that covers what's called level B harassment of harbor seals, California sea lions, and elephant seals that could result from estuary management activities. So this is any response to our activities that might alter the behavior of these pinnipeds associated with our management or monitoring activities. And the permit includes minimization measures and our monitoring requirements, as well as a requirement to report on an annual basis the results of those monitoring activities. And the permit includes the activities I described earlier. So it allows for both kinds of beach management activities, artificial breaching, and any lagoon outlet channel management during the mid-May through mid-October season, and then covers any incidental take that's associated with our biologists and staff doing monitoring studies. So that could be monitoring, taking measurements within a channel on the beach, doing our monthly beach topographic surveys that are required under the biological opinion, and any of those fisheries, invertebrate monitoring, water quality monitoring that our staff may be doing. So before I describe our Pinniped Monitoring Program, are there any activity or any questions about the estuary management project? Okay, I don't see any. So I will move on to our Pinniped Monitoring Program. So we have what's called a Pinniped monitoring plan that describes the efforts that we take for the estuary management project. And the monitoring plan is really focused now on evaluating the population dynamics of the local general haul out. And the plan also describes our monitoring methods for both baseline monitoring and any monitoring associated with our beach management activities. And so this monitoring effort is really born out of many years of previous monitoring efforts. So I think many of you probably know that the general haul out is an extremely well and long studied harbor seal haul out, beginning with the Seal Watch program that Stewards implements and was monitored for many years by Dr. Mortensen and a local general resident, Eleanor Toohey. Sonoma Water first started monitoring associated with our artificial breaching activities in the mid-1990s. And as I mentioned earlier, those efforts were initially led by Dr. Mortensen, and then Sonoma Water's biologist staff became much more involved over time. And our monitoring plan identifies goals and objectives for the monitoring efforts. So that includes monitoring the response of pinnipeds to any beach management activities that are conducted and how they respond to those activities, and also to river mouth closures and reopenings. And then monitoring the trends in the harbor seal haul out population size, as well as pup production at the haul out. And then of course, we report these results to the resource agencies and to the public. I think Andy will cover some of this monitoring schedule in detail in her presentations as well. Our new monitoring plan letter of authorization poses a new schedule for our baseline monitoring efforts. So we're now going to be monitoring from mid-March to mid-October for baseline monitoring. And then we're going to be continuing to do any kind of beach management action monitoring year-round. So the baseline monitoring methods. So our baseline monitoring is sort of just the regular monitoring that occurs on a pretty regular basis to track trends at the haul out. So this monitoring occurs at the Highway 1 overlook that overlooks Goat Rock State Beach. And the surveys will be conducted, like I said, from mid-March to mid-October, several times per month, with each monitoring shift occurring over a period of 4 hours. In the pupping season, those surveys will be done on a weekly basis. And the baseline monitoring includes both counts of seals on the beach, as well as recording the disturbances and the seals' response to those disturbances on the beach. And then our beach management monitoring activities, those methods are the same both for outlet channel and artificial breaching activities. And they include doing a 1-day pre-management survey that has to be conducted within 1 to 3 days prior to any scheduled beach management activity. And then we always have a pinniped monitor monitoring the activities the day of beach management, and then going out the following day to capture information associated with seals returning to the haul out. And the beach management monitoring includes, again, both seal counts and recording disturbances using similar methods to the baseline monitoring. I mentioned that our permit has some mitigation measures included. And during the pupping season, which is generally mid-March to the end of June, if there's a neonate, which is a pup that's less than 1 week old, in the beach management work area or on the access paths to the work area, then we would delay work until the pups left or the last possible day to prevent flooding and still being able to maintain that salmonid rearing habitat in the summer months. And then unless flooding is imminent, and we've consulted with National Marine Fisheries Service, beach management activities cannot occur more than 2 consecutive days during the pupping season. Generally, beach management activities are done within 1 day, but there have been occasions where a second day is needed. And then there's a 7-day no work period between management events during the pupping season. So we do want to report abandoned pups. And so we ask monitors to look for signs of abandonment when they're out monitoring the haul out. And so those signs might include seeing pups that have not had any contact with adults. They haven't moved around the haul out, and their attempts to nurse are being rebuffed from the adults. We ask that monitors please don't approach or move pups, but instead contact Sonoma Water staff, which would be either Andy or myself, and our contact information is on the bottom of every data sheet. And we will immediately report that potential abandoned pup to the National Marine Fisheries Service Stranding Network. And we also report it to the regional headquarter offices as well. And then finally, what do we do with all the data that you monitors would be collecting? So the data sheets are reviewed and entered into a database at least once every month. And then we use that data to evaluate for the trends that are identified as our goals and objectives in the monitoring plan. And we prepare an annual report that presents the results on a calendar year basis. And that's distributed to National Marine Fisheries Service, state parks, stewards, and then we post it on our website to make it available to the public. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions. I will stop sharing. Diane, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just curious, when the river mouth is closed and there seems to be less seals, do you know where they tend to go? Other haul out areas?
Well, I think Clara Elise mentioned this during our prior early effort for Pinniped monitoring, we did monitor other known haul out locations. We didn't actually see the numbers of seals at those alternate haul out locations increase during closure. So it wasn't clear evidence that they were utilizing those other haul outs during closures. You know, Andy, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what Jessica said is what we found is that at least in the very immediate vicinity, we didn't see a sharp increase in the number of seals, but it's also those haul outs are like rocky coastal areas that are kind of limited in the number of seals that they can actually hold. So we do see that immediately after like the river mouth is opened, that the number of seals that we count on land increases back to kind of what we saw prior to the closure. So they are around.
Hanging out somewhere.
Right. So they could be spending less time ashore and more time just at sea. They can actually be at sea for a couple of days. They don't need to haul out every day, but mostly they do. So that's one possibility, or that they're resting in an area that we're not observing, or that they're all going in a variety of different places where it wouldn't make a signal in just the count data. So without kind of having known individuals that you can identify as being from one place moved to another, it's a little tricky to answer that question. But what we do know is that they will come back.
Right. That's curious. Thank you.
Sure.
If there are no other questions, I will let the agenda move on to Andy's presentation.
Great, thanks. Get my screen going. Okay, so I'm going to start with some background information about the pinnipeds that we see here in Northern California, with some pointing out particular features to look for to identify different species that we are most likely to encounter, and to talk about some species that we have that we would rarely encounter at the Rock State Beach, but that we need to be able to identify and notify, because some of those are special status species. And it's part of our monitoring plan to record and report any of those observations. So when we're talking about pinnipeds, we're talking about fin-footed mammals that share a common ancestor, and there are actually 3 families of pinnipeds, but we're going to talk about the local families that we see, local species. So there's 4 species of odoriids or eared seals, and there are 2 species of phosid or true seals that we could see here on the North Coast. So starting with our star of the show, the Pacific harbor seal. This genera is a colony, a breeding area for harbor seals, whereas other species that we could encounter are visitors. So these are the year-round resident at the Jenner Haulout. They are a true seal. They share characteristics with other true seals in that they do not have external ear flaps, and they have a streamlined or a torpedo-shaped body. They are unique to the other true seal that we can encounter here in that males and females are about the same size, so they're not sexually dimorphic, which makes it difficult to do some population accounting when you're observing them from a distance, because you can't immediately tell what percentage of your group is male or female just by counting them. And so a couple other things that set them apart is that they have 2 color phases. So they can be light with dark spots or dark with light spots. You'll also know that for a few months out of the year, they're pretty much just like a tan brown also. So they molt or shed their fur once a year. And when it gets close to that period where their coat is kind of older, then they aren't looking particularly white or dark, but just kind of brown. But their true color phases are those 2. Something that sets them apart when you see them hauled out on land is that they will kind of rest in this C-shaped posture where they have their head and their flippers up and their belly resting, especially when you encounter them like on the rocky shoreline. They do that to kind of help thermoregulate by keeping their flippers up. This is a resident, so it's a non-migratory species, and they're found really broadly. So it's called a circumpolar distribution. So they're kind of found around the North Pole and down, as far south as Baja, California. They classify harbor seals in different distinct populations because they're non-migratory. So they have kind of distinct population segments. The California population is estimated to be at about 31,000 harbor seals in total. And that's the most recent population survey that National Marine Fisheries Service has conducted on them was in 2012. And they do those population surveys by doing aerial surveys along the California coast within like a couple weeks during kind of the peak haul out time in June or July. And it's been a little while since they've done that. The other true seal or phosid seal that you could encounter at the Jenner Haulout is a northern elephant seal. These are very distinct in their adult life stage, especially. So an adult male has that large proboscis that gives it the species its name. So those are just the males that have that. They're known for having very gregarious and vocal mating displays and males will defend harems of females. And they've developed this very thick, broad chest as part of that display and to protect themselves when they fight other males. Females are not as large, but they do also have a broad nose compared to other seals. And a subadult male will look kind of like a female in the sense that it doesn't have the large proboscis developed. They also have characteristically large black eyes and black whiskers. that can help you kind of set them apart from a harbor seal. The best way to kind of determine if you're looking at an elephant seal on the beach is actually looking at their behavior. They will use, they flip sand onto their backs as part of a thermoregulatory behavior, and that's not something that a harbor seal would do. So if you see a seal on the beach flipping sand on its back, then you know you have an elephant seal. These are migratory animals, so they do have some breeding areas in California, not too far from us, but not at the Jenner Haul Out, but you can see them. They have breeding beaches in Point Reyes National Seashore. So we do get individuals that are non-breeding age that come ashore. We have in the past had kind of wayward adult male elephant seal hang out at the Jenner Haul Out, but it's been a number of years since we've had an adult observed. One other thing well, there's a couple notable things about elephant seals that's worth sharing. I mentioned that harbor seals will molt their coat every year. That's true for other phosid seals, and the elephant seal has what they call a catastrophic molt. So instead of just like a little bit of fur shedding, it's their epidermis that sloughs off. So during their molt, you can actually see chunks of their fur on the beach, which is quite a sight. They also undergo these really long foraging migrations, and they are really, really deep divers. So they forage on benthic organisms like squid and other fish species. So they're adapted to spend a lot of time at depth, and they only come ashore really for their molting period and their breeding or pupping period. So there's one population that's from Baja to Alaska, and that is estimated at just under 180,000 individuals, and that's based on counting pups back in 2010. Here's just a couple photographs and illustrations to help kind of differentiate between what would be a subadult elephant seal and a harbor seal. So they're going to be a large adult harbor seal would be the same size as a smaller subadult elephant seal. And we have seen them at the Haul Out. And so there's a picture of one flipping sand, and then a close-up of an older pup with the big black eyes, and then illustration here just to show the scale and the size between the two. So moving on now to our odorioids or eared seals, there's 4 species that we could encounter. The most common one in Jenner is the California sea lion. They're usually heard before they're seen. So they're the ones that will bark like a dog, and you can hear them. They're often in the surf just off the shore at Goat Rock State Beach. And they might occasionally come ashore. Usually when we see them in the water, but they will come ashore on land to rest for a little bit, kind of among the harbor seal colony. They are very different physically. They can sit upright, so they can rotate their hind flippers, so they're sitting up. They do have external ear flaps. The males are much larger than the females. And notably, the adult males will have like a top knot or a prominent like protuberance on their forehead that kind of identifies them as being a breeding age male. And the males of this species are migratory, so they might range up from Southeast Alaska down to Baja. The breeding rookery is in the Channel Islands. So females will stay down in Southern California near their breeding grounds where the males will migrate. So that means if you see a California sea lion at Jenner, it's going to be a juvenile and a male, or an adult male. And their population size is estimated to be over 250,000, and that's from a 2014 survey. So here's some pictures of sea lions that we see at the Jenner haulout or in the estuary. The photograph on the left shows one kind of right in the middle of the harbor seal haulout. So you could see how right away you would notice something different because it's sitting upright. So they tend not to hang out very closely to the harbor seals. But in this picture, you can see that sometimes they can be right in the middle of the group. The other top right photograph is a group of juvenile sea lions that were hanging out in the estuary for a number of days many years ago. Sometimes changes in foraging conditions off the coast will cause groups of juveniles to kind of look for food in places that they wouldn't normally be found, and that's what's associated with that event there. And then the photograph of the group on the bottom right shows a group of adult male California sea lions that have been foraging in the estuary, and they can make quite a ruckus, so they usually let their presence be known. Here's some photographs that help identify harbor seals versus sea lions when they are in the water. We aren't counting and recording animals in the water, but it's good to know kind of what species you're looking at. So the images on the left-hand side show California sea lions swimming. So they are more likely to do a porpoising kind of swimming behavior, and they'll often create a wake behind them. You can also see that when they swim on their side, their long fore flippers will be up out of the water when they're swimming. So they use their fore flippers to glide underwater, and harbor seals use more of an undulating motion where their flippers are kind of close to their body. So harbor seals in the water are pretty stealthy, and usually they're just kind of popping their little head up. So they won't make as big a splash as the California sea lions do when they're in the water. There are a few other species that could occur at Jenner, but would be rare, but they are known to occur nearby. So we need to be on the lookout for them. One of them is a stellar sea lion, where there are some haulouts further north on the coast and more offshore. A stellar sea lion and a California sea lion look very similar, except stellar sea lions are larger and their bodies are much thicker. And I would say where a California sea lion could be described as having a dog-like face, the stellar sea lion has more of a bear-like face. So it's definitely a squattier, squished, blunt nose compared to that. Their fur is a lighter color than a California sea lion, but because animals all kind of look the same when they're wet, it's not always the best identifying feature. They do sound different too. They have a growl instead of a bark. They were recently taken off of the threatened species list for their Eastern Pacific population, which ranges up to the Aleutian Islands down to Northern California. So Alaska to California. There's a Western Pacific population also. And this is estimated to be at about 77,000 individuals pretty recently, as of 2017. There are two species of fur seals that have been known to come ashore. Usually these are short-term or stranding events where we see them ashore. So they do show up in Marin and Sonoma counties and oftentimes those animals are not in great health and end up going to the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. So that's where we have seen some occurrences locally. But they do have a breeding population on the Farallon Islands, which is not very far from us. These fur seals are very distinct. They were hunted almost to extinction because of their luxurious fur coat. So they do have thick, shiny fur. And they have really almost comically long flippers too, especially their rear flippers, which they'll often wave as a way to control their body temperature, to cool themselves off on the sand. And their fore flippers are really long too, compared to the rest of their body. And that's because they spend most of their time at sea. They're a pelagic species, so they don't come ashore outside of their breeding period very often. And so their bodies are designed for swimming out at sea. And they also, another identifying feature is that their faces they have a pointy snout and long whiskers. You might see young individuals in the area, and they would be much darker and smaller than a harbor seal typically. So their population ranges throughout the North Pacific. They classify them as their two main groups in the region. The California population has breeding grounds on, like I mentioned, in the Farallon Islands and also on San Miguel Island, which is down in Southern California. And that's a small but growing population of about 14,000 individuals, whereas the Eastern Pacific population segment, which is has its breeding grounds up in Alaska and the Pribilof Islands, is over 60,000 individuals. So the California population is a much smaller group. Another fur seal that you can see here is the Guadalupe fur seal. This is actually a population from Mexico, islands off of the west coast of Baja, but they will come ashore in California on the mainland. Mostly the sightings are from Southern California, but we have had some kind of up in the Bay Area associated with stranding events. They look very similar to a northern fur seal. The main way to identify them is how their fur on their fore flipper kind of extends beyond their wrist. So they have fur that kind of comes down at an angle onto their flipper, whereas a northern fur seal will have like a straight line of fur. And so they similarly have luxurious fur coats. They have long floppy flippers because they also have more pelagic lifestyle. And it's a smaller population and also increasing at about 34,000 individuals from a 2013 census. So if you see a fur seal or anything that you think is a fur seal, consider yourself very lucky. Take a photograph and call me as soon as you can, because it would be really important to kind of know which flavor of fur seal we're looking at, and if there's any cause for concern that they would potentially need to be calling the Marine Mammal Center for, because typically our sightings in this area would be related to stranding where the animal might be in poor health. So those are all of what we can see out there. Like I said, and maybe Jessica mentioned, we're most likely to see, in addition to harbor seals, northern elephant seals and California sea lions. But those other species could occur. But like I always say, like, if you're not sure, just take a photograph and send it. So here's a couple photographs that were taken during surveys The photograph on the left is actually of a juvenile California sea lion that's in pretty poor body condition. So it's pretty skinny, but there's not a lot there that's going to identify it because you can't really see its face and you can't really see its flippers, but really it would be its behavior or its position in the haul out that would make me think I'm looking at something that's not a harbor seal. The harbor seals tend to group together, whereas especially if an animal is in poor condition, it might be kind of isolating itself on the beach. So that's something to, look more closely at. The photograph on the right, kind of away from the group of harbor seals toward the water's edge near that log of driftwood, there is a juvenile elephant seal there. So again, about the same size as a harbor seal. It is tan, it's not spotted like a harbor seal, but if harbor seals have old coats, then they look kind of tan also. But it was flipping sand onto its back. So that was the tip off that we were looking at an elephant seal. But I have been in situations where I've been counting the group of harbor seals, and I didn't recognize right away that I was looking at an elephant seal. And I was just like, boy, that's just a really ugly looking harbor seal. And it's like, oh, because it's an elephant seal, perfectly attractive elephant seal. It just made kind of a funny looking harbor seal. So sometimes you might, it takes a minute to kind of adjust when you're used to looking at, counting individuals that are all the same species. So they tend to stick out. Another thing that's important is being able to determine age class of the harbor seals. So during the pupping season, which can begin as early as March and extend into the end of June, we need to be classifying the harbor seals that we're counting based on their life stage. So we kind of call them adults non-pups because we don't really know how old they are. And you can't really tell by looking at an individual if it's adult, like sexually mature, or a juvenile. But you can look at them and tell if it's a pup that's born that year, which is really the classification that we're trying to make. So like I mentioned, we start seeing them as early as March. Any observations we've made before March are pups that have been born before their full term. So we will sometimes see premature births. It's extremely rare that a pup born prematurely would survive. Typically their lungs are not developed enough for them to be viable. A pup will stay with its mom for about 30 days, where the mom nurses a really high quality fatty milk. And they aren't always with their mom, meaning the female can go out on foraging trips during this 30-day period. So they're not restricted to being on land with their pups during that time. And also harbor seal pups are unique among the other species we just talked about in that they can swim immediately after birth. In fact, if you happen to be a harbor seal pup that's born on a subtidal mudflat, you might actually be born in the water and then be swimming right away. So they don't go on foraging trips with their moms necessarily, but they will be in the water and swimming with them. And you can see the photograph kind of in the bottom of the image there is a harbor seal pup kind of resting on the mom's back. And that's a young pup that's still being nursed. So once the pup is weaned, the female will usually go on a more extended foraging trip, and they leave their pups on the beach. So they don't, after weaning occurs, they don't have any other kind of observable close contact with their pup after that. So they're left on their own to find their own food at that point. So they'll be really fat when they're weaned, and then for about their first year, as they're figuring out how to make a living on their own, they tend to lose a little weight. So it can be hard. It's another reason why it's hard to tell the age of a pup, because a 1-year-old pup is about the size, size as like a 3-month-old pup, because they don't grow a whole lot during that period. So here's some tips on how to distinguish our different types or different age groups of pups that we're keeping track of. We do need to give extra special protection to pups that are less than a week old, because they are much more susceptible if they were to be separated from their mom, so that they wouldn't get reunited and that they wouldn't be able to survive on their own at that point. So a neonate is a pup that we call less than a week old. They will often still have their umbilicus attached during that period. You can kind of see the pup I'm pointing to in the slide that says neonate has an umbilicus attached there. They're much skinnier relative to body length compared to any other age class of harbor seal. And you can often see folds or wrinkles in their skin, and their hip bones might be visible because they really haven't put on any weight during this early period. After that week period though, the pup has had an opportunity to put on some weight and can more successfully be reunited with its mom should they get separated, or when the mom goes foraging and then they find each other again. But they will still be associated with the female. They're still nursing at that period, but now they've put on quite a bit of mass, and they're looking really pretty chunky at this point. So here's a couple different images. I like to do a little audience participation at this point, if you're game. So here we have some photographs of harbor seal mom pup pairs taken at the Jenner haul out. And kind of based on what we talked about, or you can ask questions at this point too, see if we can identify which of these photographs we would classify as a pup or a neonate, knowing that neonates are less than a week old and pups are over a week old. Does anyone want to guess what age the pup in photograph A is?
A looks like a neonate to me.
Mm-hmm. And what tipped you off to that, Karen?
Just that he or she is so small.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
you can see wrinkles. Yeah.
Wrinkles.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe
and the wrinkles. Got it.
Yeah. Great, Clara. Yeah, wrinkly, skinny. I mean, this pup is maybe hours old in the photograph. Yeah. What about B? What would we call that?
Pup. Really fat.
Yeah. It can get to the point at the end of their weaning where they're almost as big as their mom. And if you didn't see them nursing, you would be hard pressed to call that animal a pup, because they grow so fast during that period. That photograph B is a great visual of how you see them oriented to each other. So they're not nursing right now, but the pup is like perpendicular to the mom, because if they're not nursing, they're thinking about it, and they're usually trying to get to some milk. So they're like constantly nosing and nuzzling and trying to roll their moms over onto their back so they can get access. They can be pretty aggressive about it, and moms, like a lot of moms, can get tired and kind of fed up, and sometimes they'll just like take off. They're like, I can't handle it, and they go for a swim. But most of the time they comply. So it can be really amusing to kind of watch these interactions. But I like to recommend people look for that like perpendicular orientation, because harbor seals, while they will haul out in a group, they do not actually like to touch each other. So if you see individuals perpendicular like that or touching each other in a way that's not aggressive, then you're most likely looking at a mom pup pair, kind of irregardless of size. Also, at this time of year in the summertime, the new pups will have the best looking coats. They're going to be the shiniest, the brightest white, or the darkest black coats that you'll see out there too. So that's a good indicator that you're looking at an individual that was born that year. What about C? Do we have
The only thing,
anything?
it's like the pup, I couldn't, or the baby, whatever, I couldn't tell it all, but the mom is still so huge. You kind of wonder if maybe it's a neonate just because the mom hasn't deflated yet.
Right. Yeah. C is a tough one. And so this is a good example of, it's a pup because it's nursing. So there's no doubt about that, but you don't really have any other characteristics. You can't see the rest of its body to know if it's skinny. You can't really see how chunky it is. They're wet, so it's hard to tell what the coat condition is like. At this point, you would classify anything that you can't positively identify as a neonate as a pup, because that's a broader category. So you would okay, well, I'm not sure if it has an umbilicus or not, but it's definitely a pup. So I'll use the most broad category and call it a pup. And then maybe keep your eye on that pair later on and see if you can see the same individual up on the beach and get more kind of information. But with just that information, we would call it a pup. Okay, last one. What about D?
Neonate?
Neonate.
Yeah. So we can see the small body condition, a little bit of wrinkles. At this angle, it's a little hard, but the biggest tip off is actually the mom's hindquarters. So this is a brand new born pup. The mom still has blood on the hindquarters. So this pup is just like minutes old, right? Yeah. Okay, great work. Thank you for playing along.
Andy,
So
you
that's
have a
all I
question
have for
in
you. Oh yeah.
Oh, you have a question in the chat from Justin asking how long do they nurse?
So they nurse for about 30 days. And that's it. I'm looking in the chat here. I see Diane, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I was curious also, I know that once they stop nursing, the mothers don't want anything to do with the pups, but I've also read that they teach them more how to forage in the water. And is that actually during the 30 days or will they teach them after the 30 days?
Yeah, that's a great question, Diane. So they since they can swim and at a certain level dive, just not as deeply as an adult, while they're still weaning, they do have the opportunity to go on foraging dives with their mom. I can't speak specifically to studies, but I vaguely familiar with some that have looked at these that period where moms and pups are together and having pups go on foraging trips with them. So there certainly is an opportunity for learning there. And I don't really know, it's one of those, we see them on land and without following them at sea, there could be more of a connection between the two after weaning. But I don't know specifically.
Yeah.
You need to follow them. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I tried to research it. And then another question was, is there a scientific name for a group of seals other than group? Like a pod of whales or something, or is it just called group?
Colony.
Colony. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? So I think we've provided some additional materials in with the data sheets that have some of the images that I referenced in the the drawings that show the different species and kind of what they look like in the water and what they look like on land and relative size that can be really helpful too. So if you're new and you want, more information, we've made that available. And if it's not still there, I can get it to you. Yeah, and so Jessica corrected, like they can be called a colony or a harem for a group. Okay, I think I'm up next here. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about monitoring at Jenner. First, I'm going to share some results of our monitoring that we've done so far, and then walk you through a little bit of what it's like to do a monitoring survey. I won't spend too much time in the detail of the monitoring, because I think being out there if you're new to it, being out there with someone else and being mentored is the best way to get familiar with it. But I'll try to quickly go through kind of so you know what you're getting yourself into if you want to join us. Okay. So we do see seasonal patterns in the abundance of harbor seals at the haul-out over time. This is a bar graph showing the abundance of harbor seals at the haul-out this past year in 2021. But it typifies what we see most years, where we have the greatest abundance in the summer months, and then it tends to decline in the fall. And that's associated with the time at which they have they're on their haul out or near their haul out during their breeding period. So they'll mate after, the females will mate after they've weaned their pups, and they do all of that in the water, and the males will spend more time hanging out at the rookeries, waiting for the females to become receptive after they wean their pups. And then after that period, that coincides with their molt, where they spend more time ashore to help kind of speed that along to warm up their bodies. And after all of that activity, they're a little hungry, so they tend to spend less time on land and more time at sea foraging in the fall period. So that's why we see, that's kind of the behavioral reason for what we see in harbor seal abundance. And this shows just kind of many years plotted by month of abundance. So you can see that typically we see the same thing every year. There are some exceptions where we've had peak abundance occur in the winter instead of in the summertime, but that is the exception. Excuse me. So we do find different factors over 10 years of collecting this observational data. We've kind of seen three factors mainly influencing the abundance of seals on land. One of those is time of day. This is a scatter plot of harbor seal counts over hour, so decimal hour. So noon is like kind of in the middle of each graph here. So in many times of the year, harbor seal abundance will increase as the day goes on, meaning that there are fewer seals in the morning and more seals in the afternoon. We see this mostly in the winter and spring, and less in the fall and in the summer. And this is tied to them taking foraging trips away from the haul out on a daily basis. So they might be, more individuals might be foraging at night and coming ashore, or foraging early in the morning and then coming ashore. We don't see it so much in the summer because they're spending more time on land, or in the fall because they're spending a lot less time on land. So that daily pattern is not pronounced those times a year. We also see some influence of tide height, where seals are less abundant at high tides. And this is due to wave overwash, like they physically can't be on the haul out when the waves are pushing them off. And river mouth condition is the other, so whether the river mouth is open or closed. So we do see a lot fewer seals during closed conditions as opposed to open conditions. We've looked at a couple different cofactors for this, one being more people on the beach when it's closed. There's no physical barrier for people walking across. We didn't really see an increase in disturbances during closed conditions, however. One thing I think might be contributing to it that I can't quantitatively describe is that they like being where there's an aquatic egress. They are less comfortable having to like scooch over the sand to get to where they want to go. And so they'll haul out along river mounts because there's deep water right next to the shore that's not in a wave action zone where they can kind of go in and out. So when it's closed, they don't have that condition. So they might find another place to rest or spend less time resting during that period. So we've been recording disturbances during all of the baseline and activity monitoring that we do. This is a summary of the most recent years of disturbances. It shows the gray bars are the average number of seals on a day during our counts. And then the circles are the number of seals that were disturbed by source during that day. So you can see where if a seals are observed or disturbed multiple times, you'll get more disturbances than you have seals. That's why you have some of these hanging out here. It just means that the same group was disturbed multiple times. We do see a few different sources for disturbance. The most common source of disturbance are people on the beach. It's a public beach. Harbor seals share it with the humans that use the same area. So in our baseline surveys, over half of them have some level of disturbance of the seal colony by beach visitors. The next most common source of disturbance are people in kayaks. So same kind of thing, people sharing that space, getting closer to the seals than the seals are comfortable, and they respond by alerting where they're like looking at the individuals or the cause of the disturbance. They might move away from a source of disturbance just kind of till they feel more comfortable, or if that's still they're not feeling comfortable, they will leave for the water, and that's called flushing into the water. And that's, that's where they feel safe and most protected. So they'll leave the beach haul out to go into the water at that time. So these are typically what we see. Other sources of disturbance include birds, aircraft, so drones or other aircraft that's noisy. Sometimes we get vehicle noise. It could be lifeguard vehicles on the beach. It could be a loud logging truck on Highway 1. That can scare them. Rarely, but it does happen, dogs or beach visitors with dogs will cause a disturbance, but we don't see that often. And sometimes, like a big log or something floating by in the water will freak them out too. So there's lots of in the other category. But mostly it's people sharing the park with them. We also record disturbances, obviously, during our management activities. So these management activities, at the very minimum, include people walking out onto the beach near the colony. And typically, if we're talking about opening the river mouth, it's using an excavator on the beach. So you would suspect that if there are harbor seals on the beach, 100% of those surveys, you would have a disturbance. The reason why it's less than 100% of the surveys when we're doing beach management activity is because sometimes there just aren't seals on the beach to begin with. And also, if the haul out is far enough away from the activity, they might stay on the beach during that activity. So these are the types of disturbances that we're, reporting and counting as our take under our permit. So we do notice patterns in their haul out numbers surrounding these beach management activities where any of these pre-events, it's going to be in a closed mouth situation, because that's where we're going to be out there. So we do see fewer seals prior, and then even fewer when we're actually doing an activity, because we've caused seals to leave the haul out temporarily. And then the following day we see a rebound. So now we have an open mouth condition with no equipment on the beach, and the seals are back on the beach. So we've been tracking pup numbers for many years, and they've been pretty stable and consistent. This bar shows our maximum count of pups for the season. So we look at the single day where we recorded the most pups for the maximum, and then the little diamond in the middle shows the average for that season. So it's pretty consistent over time with a few peaks and valleys. So we look at that as a way to kind of assess that it's still a breeding population, and they're using this haul out as their rookery. So that sums up kind of the highlights of our monitoring results that we send out annually. As Jessica mentioned, we have a new permit that is actually a 5-year term, a letter of authorization that goes for 5 years. But we still report annually, and we'll make those available for you. We just submitted one last month, which is not posted on our website yet, but we will get that up soon and send it over to stewards also. Read that. So I don't want to take up too much more time. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go over a survey, what's involved, and point out some things that have changed for people who are current monitors. So we are changing a little bit of our scheduling, and also how we record disturbances, but it's going to be making it so much easier for the baseline monitoring. So stay tuned if you so you can get an update on that. So this is just a picture of the data sheet. We need to you want to arrive in enough time to get the equipment from the visitor center and set everything up before your survey is supposed to start. You fill out basic information about what you're doing that day. And then before I start a count, I like to take a look around. So I'll often use the binoculars just to kind of look, make sure I know I'm looking at harbor seals, see if there's any other potential species out there, where they're located, where the groups are that I'm going to be counting that day. And then, right, so who's on the beach? Again, we went over the ID, but make sure you have kind of a game plan for how you're going to count the animals and what you're looking at. At this point, I usually draw a little sketch of what's out there too. It's going to help me throughout the survey that I can make notes if there's a noteworthy disturbance, or maybe a group moves around and a new haul out kind of forms as the tide drops, something like that. I can add it to my map. So it doesn't need to be an artistic representation, but we usually do try to include the location of the jetty wall in it, and Haystack Rock, which is that big rock on the North Spit, just as a kind of a frame of reference. So after that, you're going to use the spotting scope to conduct the counts, take some environmental conditions, and then begin your counts. So we're counting each cluster. It's just a way to make it easier for you to count. We don't really need to keep those, they get all lumped together in our analysis, but it is easier to the colony will consist of different kind of discrete clumps of harbor seals oftentimes. So you're going to count those separately, give them a letter. All adults or non-pups are counted. And then the time of year where we're looking for pups, we need to make sure we're recording neonates and pups over a week old separately. And then there's another section where you can record any other species. So you would identify which species it is, guess on their age class. Is it an adult male? Is it subadult? Use your ID tips for determining that. So, and those are only individuals on land. You can make a note if you see sea lions in the estuary in the water, but you don't need to record them here because we're just counting animals on land. Same with the harbor seals. You'll have individuals in the water. We're only counting the ones on land. And then we're also going to look for, so you can total all of the species and age classes here in the total, and then people that are near the beach site. So typically it's people that are kind of at the jetty wall and north. So we already talked about this, I won't go over it, but you know, pup and neonates, again, you know, it takes some practice to get neonates versus pups, but one thing you want to make sure is that when you're, especially when you get toward the end of the season, so if you're going to do, you know, be monitoring in June, you're going to want to make sure that you're counting pups as being those that are still nursing, so in close association with that female, not just small individuals, because they may or may not be a year old or a month old at that point. Taking photographs, so you need to take photographs each time, so it helps us keep a record of river mouth condition and location of the haul out, and those get uploaded with the data sheets. Okay, so recording disturbances for these baseline activities, they aren't changing for when we have activity on the beach. We're still recording distance and number of individuals disturbed during that. But when there's no activity on the beach, when it's a baseline survey, rather than counting the number of seals that are disturbed and recording the distance of the source of the disturbance to the seals, we're going to be tallying the number of disturbance events. So it's going to make it much more straightforward to record a disturbance, because you're looking for a source of disturbance and a disturbance response, and then just indicating each time that occurs for each source of disturbance and each response level. So I'll go through a little bit to show an example. So our 3 response levels are alert, move, or flush. And then I've listed our most common disturbance sources here, or if it's something that's not on the list, you can write at the very bottom, you can use this other category and describe what it is. If you have to have multiple other categories, you can do that too. You can use multiple data sheets, the back of the data sheet, and it's going to be recording for each species and life stage. So for harbor seals that are adults or not pups, that would be, you know, 1 data sheet. And if you had pups out there that were subject to disturbance, you would need to record those tallies separately, and also for different species. So if there's a sea lion that gets disturbed or an elephant seal that gets disturbed, that would be a different data sheet. So so you're doing your observation in between your counts. You're looking for disturbances that occur. You see people on the beach, they're getting close to the colony and they start to alert. So some of it doesn't matter how many, it could be 1, it could be all of them, alert to this group of people on the beach. So you'll just tally mark that an alert event happened. And then now these people have moved closer to the seals and they flushed, or some of them flushed. So you would indicate that a flush event happened. So that can be the same event, right? But it was a discrete kind of thing that happened. They didn't kind of alert and flush all in one, but like the individuals got closer and then they flushed. I guess what I'm trying to say is you want to record like the highest level of response to an observation of a disturbance. So then time goes by, a kayakers come and seals move to the presence of a kayaker near their haul out. So that would get another tally mark. And then before the end of your survey, you get another event where people, different group of people now on the beach have caused a disturbance and it made the seals move. And then you might add a little comment here that, you know, in addition to that photographer that flushed the seals, now you also had people on the jetty. But ultimately, having these tallies will allow us to still describe what are the sources of disturbance and what are the levels of disturbance, and how many surveys, like what percentage of surveys do these disturbances occur, which is what we've been reporting for the baseline data. So I hope that makes sense. I'm almost done, so you can ask me a question if you need clarification on that. And the last thing I wanted to mention was just reporting injured animals. So we do have a requirement to report injuries to the stranding network and to the Office of Protected Resources. So there is some like discretion in an injury. So I have a photograph here that looks like a shark bite to me. We would report that. Other things, you know, especially things that could be human caused, fishing entanglements, boat strikes, things that look to be severe or life threatening are the most, you know, the highest priority for us for reporting as soon as possible. I think we have to do it within 48 hours of making the observation. And then there are other times where you might see like something like this, where there's not really a gash, but there's a little bit of blood. It's probably another seal or even its own flipper that scratched it. So that I wouldn't record as an injury to report. So we are looking for, especially during their mating season, you might see, you know, it's not uncommon to see little scratches around their faces or on their near their claws on their flippers, but injuries that are more substantial, we definitely want to. And if you're not sure, just report it, take a photograph. There's no harm in that. And then Jessica already mentioned with the abandoned pups, that's another thing that we need to report right away. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to take questions or I can review something. If people had questions specifically about the monitoring. Karen, looks like you have your hand raised.
I have a question on the monitoring of disturbances. You have on the form a place where you note what the species is, and then you're noting the events. Are we linking species to event? So for example, if there's, you know, a couple of events that are impacting harbor seals, and then later on there is an event that affects an elephant seal, are we in the comments or somewhere else or in the area where we're circling one species? Are we noting that here, or are we having a completely separate disturbance page for example, one for the elephant seals and one for the harbor seals?
In that case, Karen, it would be a separate data sheet.
Okay,
so we
great.
would just,
thank you.
Yeah, for each category that you circle here for species and life stage, this data sheet is going to reference only that species and life stage.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
so if you had, yeah, no problem. Any other questions? I know it's a lot to take in, so I just want to reiterate that your opportunity to be mentored as a new volunteer is, you know, kind of the best way to get familiar with the details of doing an observation, but the monitoring are 4-hour shifts. You're counting seals every 30 minutes, which I failed to describe earlier. So you're not counting them constantly. You're not keeping a constant count for 4 hours, but every 30 minutes, you take a point count of the animals on land. And then in between those 30-minute counts, you would record disturbances that you observe. Okay. I'll stop my screen share.
Awesome, thanks, Andy. I actually had a question, and I'm gonna go ahead and start my screen share just so I can show folks the volunteer forms. Okay, so there's another presentation that refers to the Sonoma Water website, where you can find a lot of resources for sort of a deep dive into some of the data. And I may have went on a bit of a deep dive and have to pull up what I was looking at. But I had a question about this chart.
Okay.
Oh, not that one. This one. So this is Pinniped monitoring data from 2017 to 2021, and it looks like a decline in the population, but I wanted to ask about that to understand how to really interpret this graph.
Yeah, there is a small decline illustrated in that graph. It has initially, when I first started with this program, we were typically seeing an increase in the number, like not extreme, but the trend was increasing from year to year. And then it started to kind of level off and then even dip a little bit. So it's not, it's hard to put that in context of what's happening statewide, because it's been many years since they've done a statewide census. But I think it would take more years to see if we're kind of approaching a leveling off, or if the numbers will continue to that downward trajectory.
Okay.
Is that, I know it's not like
Yeah, I figured
that strong of an answer, but yeah, it's difficult to like expand kind of the snapshot of one rookery to like a whole population. When they talk about the impact to harbor seals, even under our permit, they are talking about the California population. So, at some level, like the California population could handle, dips at the Jenner haul out and not necessarily have an impact. But looking at data from the Point Reyes National Seashore reports, they've also noticed similar patterns in their overall abundance. So that suggests that at least locally, there could be, some decline in the numbers in the more recent years.
interesting. Great, thank you for
Sure.
the insights on that. So I don't know that we have anybody that's brand new to volunteering with stewards, but just wanted to review where our volunteer forms are. We have also been going back and asking volunteers that have been with us for some time to do a refresher with the forms, to go back and fill them out again, as many of them have changed, and we've also added some forms. So if you go to stewardcr.org, this is our homepage. Under the volunteer tab, there's a volunteer opportunities menu. So you click on volunteer opportunities and you can scroll down to downloading the new volunteer onboarding packet. This document is your guide to becoming a volunteer. The cover page is sort of a step-by-step, all the different steps to fill out associated with this paperwork and associated with the volunteer onboarding process. I'll put a link to this in the chat. If folks don't recall signing this in the last 3 years or so, it would be great to go through it again, just so that we have all the information that we need and so that you're good and covered. That is all I really wanted to mention, and then hand it off to Hollis to talk about shifts and scheduling and shadowing. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Okay, so we have 2 ways that you can volunteer. You can volunteer as a state park volunteer, and the time that you spend monitoring, those hours can be reported in the Better Impacts database, which goes towards your earning a park pass for the following year. Or you can volunteer as a stewards volunteer, in which case you don't report your hours to state parks, but you do earn a $50 stipend per shift. And if you let me know that that's your preference, then I'll provide you with a duty statement and a stipend form, and we can take it from there. No matter what kind of volunteer, under which program you're volunteering, you sign it the same way. We have a Google Drive, which includes a schedule, a contact list for all of the other monitors, and paper documents like the protocol, stipend reimbursement forms, anything pertaining to the program. And you will be set up to have access to edit this drive so that you can schedule yourself. There are 2 standard shifts per month, and then if the estuary closes and there is any kind of breaching activity, we'll also monitor the day following a shift, a breach, in order to capture any impact to the animals caused by the heavy equipment working down there. The equipment is kept at the Gender Visitor Center, and what we do is we have you shadow an experienced volunteer your first 1 or 2 shifts out so that you can kind of get used to the logistics, filling out the forms, working with somebody else. Clara, who was on earlier today, is very experienced. She said she's been here for back in the day when they used to also do the rocks up the river. And she's very helpful. We also have a couple of others that are very helpful indeed. And so you're not thrown out there on your own. I would like to say that this is a solitary activity. Some people really enjoy that. Diane, I think, is one of those that found that she enjoyed it during the past year after being trained, and you can certainly ask her any questions. But it's a wonderful way to spend a day. It's 4 hours in a wonderful location. And as I said, you are mentored in terms of the forms, what you're seeing, reporting disturbances. So it's not a matter of you're being out there on your own without any kind of resources. So I guess, Justin, should I put my email address in the chat if people want to let me know if they are interested in signing up for either program? How should we do that?
Yeah, I think that would be great. I can also, I'll send out a link to folks with the recording as well, just so we can share it with people. So we can follow up with people that are here today.
By the way, I found this really, really helpful. I've gone through all of the trainings and over the past few years, but the refresher is always, really great. And there's always new information. So thank you very much to both of you for what you've done for us.
Thank you, Alice. All right. Do we have any final thoughts or questions or feedback from participants?
Karen's already signing up.
Just a big thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
You know, we're so fortunate to have such a rich area right near where we all live. I mean, it's incredible out there, and it's different every day of the year.
yeah. Jenner and the river mouth are really special, but it's the harbor seals that are just as crucial population for and a sort of a jewel of the county. So grateful to everyone that has a role in protecting them and making sure they have a good future.
And Karen, as you said, it's a special place to be living, and it's a special place to have access to. But it's particularly special if you're spending a concentrated period of time in the same place over and over and over, because you become intimately familiar with the area and the seal population, the bird population, everything else that's going on there. And a favorite quote of mine from Mary Ellen Hannibal, who writes a lot about citizen science and community science, is that the thing about community science is that it's observations with consequences. So as long as you're out there observing what's going on, it's especially beneficial if you're able to document and report it to somebody who can then make management decisions based on what you're seeing all the time.
Nice. Karen, do you have your hand up?
I do. I just wanted to add that yes, like others, I've done the trainings before, but this was really particularly coherent and concise. You conveyed a lot of information in a really incredibly thoughtful and useful way. And it was also really inspiring. I know, like a lot of us, we're all spread pretty thin, but it just really reinvigorated interest in getting out to the shore and looking at the animals and seeing what's going on. So thank you very much. It was really wonderful.
Thank you for joining.
I'd just like to say thank you to Justin and Hollis, and I look forward to working with Alice. We've worked with Steward for many years, and I feel like we have a great partnership, and really appreciate all the volunteers' time collecting this information that's so important to us understanding how the haul out functions and impacts to its continued use by harbor seals and other species, and just really appreciate everyone's time and energy on this.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, we look forward to meeting in person at some point.
I hope we get a chance to do that soon.
Yeah. All right. Well, that closes it off. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. And this will be posted, and we'll send up a follow-up email. But just want to offer our sincere appreciation and gratitude, and hope you enjoy a little bit more rain this afternoon or tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah. We need it.
Thank